first of all, I want to talk about this article in, this is an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. This is a kind of a publication of professors in higher education. It's kind of the mainstream publication in higher education. And it has been very much kind of captured, if you will, has in the past championed woke. It basically is whatever academia is reflecting, right? It is what is academia. It reflects back to academia what is going on in academia. So it is very kind of mainstream academia, if you want. And mainstream academia over the last 10 years has been quite woke, and it's the Chronicle of Higher Education has reflected that back to them. Well, they just had a pretty amazing article published, very critical of woke, and I thought I'd read you some of it. It's kind of lengthy, but I think it's worth reading. And considering that this was published at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Now, I don't want to make a big deal out of one article. Maybe we'll have to see if there's a trend and there's more that's going to come out. But, one article is better than 0 articles, and this one article is pretty hard-hitting. Pretty hard-hitting. All right, so let's read it. And as you'll see, written by somebody most likely, on the left, right? So that's part of what makes this hard-hitting. He writes, quote, "Over the last 10 years or so, a cultural revolution has been imposed on this country from the top down. Its ideas originated in the academy, and it's been carried out of the academy by elite educated activists and journalists and academics. Its agenda insists that the nuclear family is evil, that something called whiteness is evil, that the sex binary, which is core to human biology, is a social construct. It is responsible for the DEI regime, the training and minders and guidelines that have blighted American workplaces. It is joyless, vengeful, and tyrannical. It is purist, totalistic. I don't know if that's a word. It demands affirmative, continuous, and enthusiastic consent." Describes woke pretty well. How did we get to this pass? Article continues. How did the academy, the school and citadel and engine of this revolution become so desperately out of touch with reality, including the reality of people's lives outside the liberal elite, their needs and beliefs and experiences? One answer is that academics tend to live inside a bubble. When groups whose members are broadly similar in outlook are isolated from external influences, 2 things happen. Their opinions become more homogeneous, and their opinions become more extreme, which is exactly what's been taking place in the academy in recent decades. The ratio of liberals to conservatives has soared, and more of those who identify as left identify as far left. And both of those trends are more pronounced in the fields and institutions that are leading the revolution: the humanities, the social sciences, exclusive of economics, the studies programs and departments, the schools of education and social work, the elite universities, and liberal arts colleges. Now, I'll offer you, I think, a deep analysis of why this is happening in a moment, but it's interesting to see how they see it. This is a good sentence, I think. "The reason that these disciplines have drifted so far from reality is that they are not answerable to reality. Those fields have another thing in common. They're intellectually corrupt." You know what I'm talking about. Any fool idea passes muster, no matter how preposterous, as long as it conforms to prevailing theoretical trends and preferred ideological positions. Nobody wants to make waves, to speak up at a conference, to undermine a colleague or colleague's students, to invite examination of their own research. Data is massaged. Texts are squeezed or bound or gagged. Jargon helps to paper over cracks in logic. Countervailing evidence is tucked under the cushion. Standards are ignored to the point where no one can even recall what they are anymore. It's no wonder that the social sciences are suffering a replication crisis. in the humanities, there is no crisis because there is no replication to begin with, no factual claims to reproduce. He goes on. The reason that these disciplines can drift so far from reality is that they're not answerable to reality. If an engineer miscalculates an equation, the building will fall down. But what would accountability to reality mean in the humanities, given that their findings are never applied? The Moore field becomes beholden to theory, or theory, the further it floats away from empirical observations and therefore corrections. The enterprise becomes entirely self-referential. Words built on words, a kind of intellectual Ponzi scheme. I like that. That is a great way to think about it, intellectual Ponzi scheme. So how are academics going to respond to their political repudiation? One alternative, the likeliest one, will be to stay the course. The people have spoken, but the people are wrong. They've been misinformed and disinformed. They are victims of false consciousness, too benighted to understand their own interests. They are racist, sexist, xenophobic, yearning for a strongman. The attitude reminds me of the few American communists who were still around when I was young, scientifically certain of everything as they headed towards political extinction. But academics have another option. They can entertain the possibility that they've been wrong about a lot of things, and for a long time. They can consider the notion that Harris lost because of racism and sexism is belied by the fact that we have already elected a black president, that Harris received a larger share of white vote than Joe Biden, that a female presidential candidate has already won the popular vote, that the nation, far from distrusting women with executive office, has elected 44 female governors in 31 states, that 16 of those governors have been Republicans, which means that most Republicans supported them, that those states included not only blue or purple ones, but Alabama, Arkansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and South Dakota, that Kansas and Texas, they've actually elected Democratic women governors. And that while there are surely people in this country who wouldn't vote for a woman or non-white presidential candidate, they also surely wouldn't vote for any Democrat. That Harris lost for other reasons altogether. They might further consider that the majority of Black, Latino, and Asian Americans do not share their politics or ideology. That the same people who speak for those communities in elite liberal spaces, not only colleges and universities, but the media, the arts, and nonprofits, share the politics and points of view not of those communities, but of other liberal elites, and therefore do not, in the simplest and most important sense, represent them. And then he closes, yes, Trump is appalling, evil, criminal. But the worse he is, the worse the liberal elite must be if so many prefer him to them. That was really good. Coming from somebody on the left. Now, they're still not philosophical soul-searching. They're still not a real soul-searching about the real causes, about the postmodern philosophy that guides all of this, about the whole repudiation of reason, about the repudiation of logic. Logic is connected to reality, about the very fact that modern academics repudiate the idea that reality matters, that reality is objective. There's also no repudiation of the idea of altruism, which ultimately guides the whole intellectual framework of intersectionality and setting group against group, and of collectivism more broadly, of collectivism on top of altruism, which demands the sacrifice of individuals to groups. But at least there is a recognition that the woke leftist elites have become completely divorced from reality. And that from somebody who clearly hates Donald Trump. I'll give him credit for that, as well as for denouncing the left. Somebody who's clearly not just a MAGA conservative, and yet who can recognize that the left, the dominant ideology today in the humanities, social sciences, is fundamentally corrupt and disastrous. Disastrous. And by the way, he's wrong that it has no effect on reality. It has a huge effect on reality. It has an effect on people's psychology. It has an effect on people's attitudes towards life. It has an effect on the way people vote, but also on the way people structure their lives and the way they behave and the way they and what they do with their lives. And it is a disaster. It's part of why this country is being and is so dark and oppressive, and why there's so little real thinking going on both left and right. These are supposed to be the intellectual elites. These are the people who are supposed to be teaching us how to think, the facts of reality. And by not doing that, teaching us in a sense the opposite, they are undermining the entire culture. So yes, this is pretty horrific, and this is representative, I think, today of our leftist elites, the elites at our top universities, particularly at our top universities, but really overwhelmingly left-right. Our universities are dominated by the left, and often the worst kind of left, the worst type of left. And all of that to add a point of reference to the idea that I've been articulating for a while now, that maybe, I don't know this for fact, but I can hope, we've achieved some kind of peak woke, peak crazy left, peak insane left, and that maybe now even within the left, even within the left, the political left, but also the intellectual left, there is a real rethinking not just of their politics, but more fundamentally, and maybe more importantly, a rethinking of their philosophical framework, their philosophical ideas. So we can hope.